Pop Culture Pastor.
All right. So here I am. I'm alone in the studio because Cody is coming to us live on the phone on location from Richmond, England.
Not quite, but yes, I'm on the geek phone.
Okay, yeah, Cody's not in Richmond. Reporting live from the site of where Ted Lasso takes place. He's actually in Western Kansas. Did I get that right?
You did, unfortunately.
Do you want to tell people what you're doing? Or no?
Clinical intensives,
Oh
which is a
gosh.
fancy way of saying one long week to show that I know a little bit about therapy.
I respect what you do, but that sounds incredibly boring.
Um, it's going to be intense, so it won't be boring for me.
So
I will
so
be in tears probably.
so it's not just clever terminology.
No,
All
not
right.
clever at all. It's
Okay.
literal.
All right. Well, this is Watch-alongs. We're watching Ted Lasso, and we're here to talk about season 3, episode 4. This episode entitled "The Big Week." And it's the big week where Richmond will go up against West Ham, who it's fair to say are their arch enemies
Right now.
Yeah. um Cody, and by the way, everyone listening in, I don't know if this will be as long as our normal watch alongs, because Cody's on the geek phone, and we pay by the minute.
We do.
Cody, here's where I start off this episode, because for me, this episode is clearly, and maybe the one of the themes of the entire season, but it seems so centralized in this episode, especially given what happens in the game, which we'll talk about later. But it seems like it's about anger. And right off the top, I want to get this out of the way because it's going to be instrumental in the way we talk about anger in this episode. And we are pastors. So one of the things we really like to talk about when it comes to anger is this story in the Bible about Jonah. And the whole story in the Bible about Jonah is how anger separates Jonah from what's best for him. And the Bible now explicitly states that anger is not a sin. Anger can be helpful for us. It points us to justice. But the Bible also says to get rid of anger quickly. Anger doesn't lead to human flourishing. And that's what I think we see a lot of in this episode. Cody, do you have thoughts just on the broad sense of anger?
I agree that for most of the characters, anger is the primary issue, and it's not dealt with in a quick manner. And you see the downfall that leads to. I would also point out that I think the backup issue that underlines this episode is pride.
Mm.
And you see that from a character that is now distant from Richmond. And so, which leads to some anger by the Richmond folks. But
Okay.
yes,
Yeah. Well, I think it makes sense. I think the character you're talking about is Nate.
Nate the Great.
Yeah, Nate the Great. And I think it actually makes sense to go ahead and talk about Nate first in this scenario because he is the farthest along on his journey into anger here. Maybe other than Rebecca. But Rebecca has what I would say is a breakthrough at the end. And so I kind of want to save her.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about Nate. Nate begins this episode with, by the way, something that I've been pressing for the entire season, thinking, okay, at some point, I think this is a redemption arc for Nate. And we see a lot of signs of that in this episode as he's sitting in his office and Rupert comes in and asks him how he's doing, the big week of the big game. And he says something along the lines of, well, I'm kind of nervous. I haven't seen Ted since I left, and I'm kind of wondering if I owe him an apology.
He does. I'll answer that.
Yeah, he does, and it's an interesting place we find Nate in, because we saw him burning with anger, and he's held on to this anger, but now he's starting to waffle. He's starting to wonder. We've seen signs of it. We saw signs of it in the last episode when he sees Richmond on the winning streak, and he kind of gets a little smirk. He doesn't slam his computer shut. It doesn't make him angry. He sees a little smirk. We see it a little bit in this episode as well, when he's got like his little toy soccer set, and he like knocks the Ted Lasso piece off the board, but then like weirdly has this moment where he feels a pang of guilt or whatever it is, and he picks it up gently and puts it back up on the table, almost like in a position of honor. And so it was very interesting to watch Nate kind of waffle, and it seems to be, then we get these interactions with Rupert, where it's like, is Rupert the devil?
I was going to say that Rupert's theme song should be "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones, because he just knows every correct button to push, and at the perfect time to ruin this redemptive arc that Nate could have. And he interrupts, he casts doubt, he persuades, he brings in all the lustrous things of life and gives Nate access to social status and things that he's never had before. And each time this happens, it then makes it more difficult for Nate to actually go and approach Ted, which is what I wanted this whole episode, and it really doesn't come to fruition.
Yeah, but the important thing is we see that Nate wants to. The funny thing is, the first interaction is on the elevator, where there's a ton of people in there, and then all those people get out because they were all like media and whatever, and they're going to the field level, and he's like hiding in the back corner as if he's not going to be seen. Like,
I didn't see him at first.
He was like a chameleon, man. I didn't see him, but he's like hiding in the back of the elevator. He gets noticed. It's a very awkward interaction. Ted is very affable, and they actually have this interaction where it looks like, just as Nate's about to maybe apologize, the door opens and there's Rupert. And
perfect timing.
Yeah, it stops the interaction. Then they get to the field. Ted comes up to him again to shake his hand and say, "Hey, let's have some fun out there." And he kind of is really cold. And so we almost see it is Rupert's kind of like the character of the Al Pacino's character in The Devil's Advocate.
Yeah.
Because like then later on, when he sees Nate sees Ted in the tunnels after the game, and they're by the bus, he's talking to Trent Krim. Again, he's looking kind of longingly, and that's right when the assistant to Rupert shows up and says, "Hey, the boss is looking for you." And then where do they go? He takes him out to some fancy club. He throws some pretty girls at him. And I'm like, oh yeah, he really is the devil.
Oh, so, Rupert.
Yeah. And so Nate's arc, I think, is progressing. We saw signs of Nate waffling, and I think where we're going with this is he's finally realizing what his anger has done. So like, here's the thing. As with Jonah, his anger is maybe justified, if not misdirected, right?
Yeah.
So Jonah's mad at the Ninevites, which is the capital of Assyria, and the Assyrian Empire has done some terrible things to Jonah's people. So there's a reason that he's upset, and they're valid reasons. Like the Assyrian Empire was pretty awful in the way they treated other places, the way they took over, beat them in war. They were the first real empire to use military might as their strength. And so Jonah has a lot of good reasons for being upset. Remember, anger points us to justice. And just like that, Nate has reasons to be upset. He's had a life of being bullied. He's had all of this. He's not taken seriously. His father looks past him. The question is why did he take it out on Ted Lasso? Well, I think it's because Ted's an easy target. Nate is a meek kind of guy. He's scared. He's like I think of the first scene in the whole one of the first scenes in the whole series where he walks into Rebecca's office or she calls him in because he's outside and he can't say a word. He can't even utter a word because she's the big boss. But Nate is also the guy who tells Roy in season 1, I don't know if you remember this, Cody, but he tells Roy anger is your superpower. And so he's a guy like who clearly believes that his anger is going to do him well. And on the outside, going into this season, it's got him this amazing job. He's getting respect for the mind he has for the game of soccer. But it's just like Jonah. Does your anger serve you well? Well, what does Nate really want? I think Nate is starting to figure out that what he really wants is people that love him, people that see him. And I think he had that with Ted.
I would say that Ted was kind of filling the dad void. And when Ted's primary attention wasn't on Nate in season 2, that led to the bitterness that he feels towards his own father, and it gets projected onto Ted. And I think that that Ted is also just someone that, being happy-go-lucky and Nate having so much anger, it's really easy for him to attack. And so I'm hoping that there will be another match towards the end of the season between the two clubs, and we can finally get that moment. But if Rupert keeps sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, I don't know if we get it.
Yeah, he's definitely going to need to separate himself from Rupert in some way if we're going to get our redemption arc out of Nate. But that's where we leave this episode, where his team wins, Nate's team wins, and we'll talk about a little bit of that here in a minute. But still definitely separated from what we know to be actually a better situation for him, the people that actually cared about him. And we saw signs this week of him waffling and maybe understanding that, but we'll get there. Let's talk about Rebecca next, because Rebecca in this episode like is almost manic a couple times, because she's put so much pressure on this game.
Too much.
Yeah, she hates Rupert so much, and the anger she has for him clearly didn't subside as much as maybe we thought it might have a little bit in season 2. They made it clear way back in episode 1, which we talked about here on the Watch-along pod, that she's clearly has not progressed as far as maybe we thought she might have. And so she's still got this anger. She wants to win this game in the worst way. And you're thinking, well, maybe they have a shot because they got Zava. And yeah, so Cody, Rebecca, where do you see Rebecca? Because there's something that happens at the end of this episode that makes me think she's kind of figured out one part of her anger. And I'll get to that in a minute, but like I don't want to step on any ideas you have for the character of Rebecca. What'd you see out of Rebecca?
So I think that Rebecca has made huge progress from literally hiring a coach to sabotage her ex-husband's team, because that's what the ex-husband Rupert was most concerned about. But you can still see that she still holds a grudge, still has an axe to grind. But during this episode, I think that she has the realization that although she may not be still happy with the whole Rupert situation, and that his team's doing better than her team, that she can't project her anger and her feelings onto people that don't operate in that modality. Because her conversation with Ted during halftime and even afterwards lends itself to saying that she is aware of how she feels and how Ted operates, in that putting all this pressure on Ted's not the best.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Rebecca is really in this place where maybe just like Nate is, where she's got all this anger for a certain thing, a certain way she's been treated, just like Nate has anger for a certain way he's been treated. And then they pick all these objects that are going to be the object of their anger that maybe don't deserve it. So Nate takes out his anger on Ted, takes out his anger on Richmond in general, when maybe that's the place where he was most accepted in his life, is at Richmond. Now, he did get bullied by Jamie in season 1, but Jamie's kind of a punk in season 1, especially. He has an arc, his own arc kind of going on, where we see Jamie improved. It's actually a topic of discussion with Keely and her friend Shandy, where
Shandy.
Shandy just wants to, pursue Jamie in a physical way. And Keely kind of starts talking about Jamie and starts realizing, as maybe she's saying it, that oh, he's actually changed quite a bit. He's progressing through stuff too. And by the way, a lot of the way he is based on anger from his father, the way he was treated by his father. And so that has driven him to become a great soccer player, but it has also driven him to become kind of a pre-Madonna, as Roy would have called it.
Yes.
And so there's just a lot of this anger stuff going on. And with Rebecca, we see that she's not just angry at Rupert. Maybe she's angry at Bex, Rupert's new wife, with whom he has a kid. It's clear that Rebecca thinks she's too old to have a kid, or we don't really know the full story there, I don't think. Although the fortune teller tells her she's gonna have a child, and
she triggers her.
Yeah, it triggers her, which makes us think that, oh, maybe she's been told she can't, or that she thinks she's too old. There's something else going on there. And so she has, what we assume is a fair amount of anger and vitriol towards Bex as well. But something really interesting happens at the end of this episode, because that makes us think Rebecca is moving forward. She's starting to figure the anger out a little bit, because she sees Rupert with his assistant. Just catches a glimpse as she's passing through on an elevator. Rupert's clearly up to his old tricks. He's cheating on Bex. And in what is a really kind of stunning and cool moment for Rebecca, she goes up to Rupert while being civil and kind of just whispers in his ear. And instead of being super aggressively angry or yelling at him, she says, "Hey, I saw you with your assistant." And it's not about her hurt at that point. She's thinking of the other people. She says, your daughter deserves better than that, and so does Bex. And I thought that was a really cool moment.
Knock it off, Rupert.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool moment, Cody.
Yeah, there was significant growth within that scene, because clearly for the first couple of seasons, she hasn't had any positive thoughts or affirmations about Rupert's wife, but now she is able to be supportive in a way of, hey, she deserves better, and so does your daughter.
Yeah, and it's a really telltale sign, and I think you see this in our society, our culture a lot. In our culture a lot, when we're angry, we want retribution. And we may call that justice, but it's not really justice. What we want is revenge. We want retribution. And I think what anger is supposed to point us towards is justice, real justice, which in a biblical sense would be defined as a things made right. This is the way things are supposed to be, and justice is a making things right. It's a repair. It's a reconciliation. And so in this moment, instead of just taking out her anger on Rupert, which has been what she wanted to do, she instead, and this is one of the big keys, I think, of when your anger is leading you towards real justice. You're not thinking of hurting the person that hurt you. You're thinking of the people around that person still that are going to be affected by them in the future. And so in this instance, she's more concerned about the child that up to this point has been a source of hurt for her, for Rebecca, and Bex, who is the woman that replaced her. And so, like, that's a huge step. It's a huge progress.
It was.
Do you have anything else to say about Rebecca, or do you want to move on?
Move on.
Okay. Next, the team / Coach Beard and Roy. Now, as if it was up until this point where I wasn't sure, but I was like getting all these anger things. I'm like, man, they're really hitting this anger piece hard. And then I thought, but I was like, I don't know if they're hitting it hard enough where I think this is what the whole episode about. Then the game happens. So one of the subplots running throughout the episode is the players accidentally find out that somebody tore the believe sign in half, which we remember and the viewer knows was Nate. The players don't know who tore it. Trent Krim has this kind of aha moment, and he goes all investigative reporter, gets the video, and the video is screened for the coaches, who I believe Ted Lasso already knew as well, didn't he? Or did he not?
I think he had his inclinations at least.
Okay. So the coaches find out that it was Nate that tore the believe sign. And Beard and Roy, they want to use this as motivation for the players. And it isn't until halftime. So what happens is the game is scoreless. They're playing a tough first half. It's close. Then the Ham, what's the name of the team? West Ham scores a goal, and you're thinking, okay, well, maybe they can just get by here. And then the unthinkable happens because of Nate's prowess, because of Nate's ability to be a good coach, which he is. They score another goal right before the half, make it 2-0, and this is a dire situation in soccer because they don't score a lot of points.
There's no coming back from that.
It's a tough climb. You're down 2-0. That's tough. And so they go in at halftime. Ted sees Rebecca, who kind of motions him over, and she, in this weird sort of manic way, realizes her anger's been putting a lot of pressure on Ted to win this game. And I don't know if I believe her in the moment, but she's saying the right things.
She's saying the right things, and I honestly think she's trying her best to actually put that forth as truth, although deep down inside she still wants to win it. But
yeah.
2-0 is a steep mountain to climb.
More importantly, what's happening here is that Ted needed to be out of the locker room. And while he's out of the locker room, he tells the coaches to handle it. And Coach Beard and Roy handle it by showing the players the video of Nate tearing the believe sign, which puts them in like a frothy, rabid state. And they come out in the second half, Cody, and they look like the Detroit Pistons circa 1986.
I was going to say, like, their behavior and attitude is equivalent to the Malice in the Palace in the NBA about 20 years ago. So
yeah, this is something it's done over the top, and I don't know. We need some real soccer fans on to say, hey, have you ever seen anything really like that, where a team just lost its cool? Because what happens is like sometimes it's a subtle balance when you want to use anger at somebody or another team to try and motivate you, right? It's kind of a subtle thing. It's a tightrope act because on some level, in a subtle way, it can work to motivate you if it like motivates your effort. But if you go over the line, and again, the show seems to be saying something about anger, about how, hey, it's good up to a certain point, but when they come out of that locker room, they start getting red cards like immediately. Players start getting kicked out of the game, and it turns into a circus.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that. Like that was too over the top.
Yeah.
Like, um, even in hockey, like that doesn't happen to that extent. And it really was a misstep, in my opinion.
Oh, by
I
the show
mean,
writers.
yes,
Yeah.
because if you're not going to put a whole lot of emphasis on football or soccer, then when you do actually have it as a plot piece, do it some justice. Like, I'm okay with like one red card and several guys getting yellows and like the whole team being dejected, but when like 3 or 4 guys get removed because they got red cards, it becomes too unbelievable,
Yeah.
especially at this level of soccer. It's not like um, dad league.
Right, right. And this is the Premier League, and it's a little cartoonish, and I thought that in the moment, but I do think they're trying to tell you something. Again, they're trying to tell you something about anger, and about that the coaches kind of learned this lesson too, Coach Beard and Coach Roy Kent, where, like, it's funny, they want to be yelled at after the end of the game, and Ted Lasso's not going to yell at them. And that's a certain plot point we need to hit too, because they think Ted should be angry, but they've thought Ted should be angry the whole episode. They thought he should be angry at Nate. They thought the team should be angry for knowing that the belief sign got ripped in half. But here we get a solid thing by the writing room to say, does your anger do you well? And I think this is really interesting, that this show is really playing around with this idea of anger and whether it serves us or not. And in the team's case, it clearly does not. Like they go above and beyond, like you said, a little cartoonish, to show us that, hey, this didn't do them any favors. They had a little bad luck. Nate made a good call. They were down 2-0, and then they see that video. They come out all mad and jacked up, and the wheels fall off. And so I think the show is saying something. Now, what's really interesting, if we move on to the final character I want to talk about, and that's Ted. Because Ted, the whole episode, is trying to assure everyone he's not angry. But that's not the case, is it, Cody?
Um, he does not present his anger the way that everyone around him does. He's
Mhm.
more of a suffer in silence kind of dude,
Yeah.
and um, which I do think that the anger and the pride go hand in hand. Um, and because with Roy and Coach Beard, you do see them wanting Ted to be angry at them and wanting to get yelled at, but it's more so than they feel that justice has been done against them and that they can move on.
Yeah.
Where Ted taking the high road really makes that difficult for them
Mhm.
to skate through. And I think that part of Ted's um, unwillingness to share that, besides that he knows that it doesn't do much good for anyone, is that um, like he wants to give the presentation that he's doing good, he's doing okay, but in reality, not only with anger, but with stress and panic attacks and stuff, um, he really isn't doing so well.
Yeah, he's repressing his anger, but it's still
Mm-hmm.
in there. And by not letting it out, he's causing himself damage. The panic attacks are probably most definitely, as we see in this episode, as one is triggered for him after he was looking, well, in the last episode, after he finds out that his wife is with the family, the former therapist that saw them, which, as we discussed in the last episode, it's borderline unethical at minimum.
Yeah.
At a minimum. So he has a right to be angry. Anger is pointing him towards justice. He has there is probably some impropriety on the therapist's part. But he's repressing it. And in this episode, we see the Coach Beard, Coach Roy, trying to get Ted to admit that Nate hurt him, that Nate did hurt him. And he doesn't want to say it, even though he did. It did hurt Ted that Nate said the things he said and left for where he left. And then it's been, saying the things he's been saying in the soccer media, the football world. And then in this episode, we see Nate again with Rupert's prodding to be unkind to Ted, even when Ted is still just being kind to Nate. And so it all kind of culminates in this moment at the end of this episode where we see Ted finally let his anger out. And this is like the healthiest part of the whole episode, Cody, because in a very civil manner, while still making sure that his ex-wife knows that he cares about her, he says, "Hey, this hurts me, and the fact that you're with this guy ticks me off." And she kind of smiles when he in that moment, which, because we're led to believe that their marriage sort of ends because she knows he's not being real and open with it by not telling her when he's angry. He's repressing his anger. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I thought I lost you there for a second.
Nope, I'm still here. But yeah, I think that um Ted wasn't being genuine, like with her in particular for the latter part of their relationship. But you do see in that moment that she appreciates him being honest and forthcoming, um, which when the previous episode when he had called and the doctor had answered the phone and both her and the doctor are concerned about what Ted's reaction response is going to be, because Ted represses everything and doesn't really share, and then he has panic attacks and meltdowns, and um, him actually venting and actually being able to communicate with his words is a huge step within the therapeutic process.
So, where do you think this goes? Like, what? Honestly, I'm kind of thinking this episode might have been a turning point for most of these characters we've talked about.
I mean, it's hard for me to say this is the turning point, um, just because there really wasn't much resolve for the team. Not a lot of resolve for Roy or Coach Beard. Rebecca, I think, is turning. I'm not sold on Nate yet, just because Rupert still has his hands and everything. So for me, Ted and Rebecca might have these moments,
Yeah.
but Keely is struggling with Shandy and her shandiness, and I don't know how that's going to play out, especially now that Jack or whatever the lady's name is now in the picture. And
Yeah, that was the wild card of the episode for me. I didn't know quite how to place that.
yeah, that definitely is going to have some bearing on Keely and Shandy's dynamic going forward.
But again, it also lends to, like, I think Keely's storyline is the weakest storyline. And I think that again proves that maybe they just didn't know what to do with her character this season. Because it again, her storyline seems the most out of place here.
Um, I can see them building towards something maybe, but it's maybe a coming of age for her because she's kind of just flowed through relationships, and who is she outside of these relationships? Who is she outside of being a model?
Yeah.
She's now actually having to find that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, yeah, if we go back just to what we were talking about just before that, Ted and Rebecca have these catalyst moments where something changes the nature of their relationship with their anger. Rebecca's is seeing Rupert with his assistant, and I think she kind of sees, like, why am I so angry about losing this guy? He's not worth being angry about. And it shifts to telling him what she tells him, to say, hey, your daughter and Bex deserve better than this. And then Ted has this catalyst moment of with the doctor, the therapist, who's now dating his ex-wife, and he finally gets to this place of, like, okay, I'm going to unrepress. I'm going to release this anger. And as we know, the releasing of the anger can be a good thing. As a therapist, someone in therapy type settings, wouldn't you say that's good? That it
It
comes to the surface.
I think that being able to process it, being able to talk about it, being able to cope through it, um, are all vital things.
Yes. Awesome. All right. You got anything else you want to say about the episode?
It might be my least favorite so far of the season.
Interesting.
I
Interesting.
I'm really am hung up on the whole soccer dynamic,
Mm.
not being realistic in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a little bit of that in the last episode too with Zava. Like, I get he's supposed to be good, but he seems kind of godly on the soccer pitch. And it seemed a
Yep.
little cartoonish in the last episode. So yeah, I can see that. I can see that being an issue for folks. Who's the winner of this episode?
Um, 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 Maybe Rebecca. That's who I'll go with.
Yeah, I think she's getting a chance to um put her acting chops into this character a little bit more. She's got a lot more nuance in the last couple episodes, and now I assume we'll find out more about the fortune teller predictions as we move forward in this episode. I can't disagree with that. I was gonna go with either her or I really like Jamie's storyline. He doesn't get to do much, but I'm with Keeley. I like that we're seeing him mature. We're seeing him move forward. We're seeing him be respectful and kind. We saw him trying to comfort Roy in the last episode, to be a real friend. And so I've been digging his character. I liked what he had to do in this episode, even though it still wasn't much. Who's the loser of the episode?
Um,
There's only one right answer for this, by the way. This character, I don't know, is necessary and is kind of annoying.
okay, because I was going to go with Ted.
Oh, Ted's the loser?
Yeah.
Okay, explain.
Well, I mean, literally, all this stuff is happening around him, and he has no control over any of it.
Yeah. And he seems very unconcerned with the soccer.
Very unconcerned with the soccer and the soccer sweats, paying the bills.
I think your prediction from the former episode is going to be right, by the way. I think Ted doesn't, I don't know if Ted makes it through the whole season. He might go home.
Goodbye, Ted.
Yeah. Um I was gonna say Shandy.
Shandy is the worst. Although like she her correction at the end isn't too devastating, and I don't think she's aware of all the issues she's causing.
Yeah, yeah. She's clearly there for Keely to mature in her role. That's why her character is there. But I want Shandy to just go somewhere and eat her hair. Go away.
Ewy.
So what would your how many mustaches out of 10 for this episode? You said it was one of your least favorites of the season.
6.
A 6. Okay. All right. I'm gonna give it a 7, which is about average. That's like an average episode for Ted Lasso for me. Well, I'm with you. I don't think it was the greatest, but I think now I'm just so sold out on the Nate redemption arc that I to see little hints at it. I just wanted more.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Yeah. All right. Another episode of Watch Alongs complete. Thank you so much for listening. We will watch next week's episode and get back to you next week, and where we'll talk about the progression the characters are going to make. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Give us a review. That always helps. If you are listening on a site where you can give a review, if not, just a rating of 5 stars, good. We'll take that.
We'll take all the 5 stars.
All the 5 stars. Make sure and follow us on Facebook and the community group on Facebook. Join that as well so you can keep up with us. We have a Twitter account as well. We're working on other social media. We're old. You just got to give us a bit.
Indeed.
All right, Cody, do good things in Western Kansas this week. We're not going to have Cody for the big pod.
I'm gone. Gone,
Yeah.
girl.
So yeah, stay tuned for that. We're formulating plans here.
Sounds exciting and nerve-wracking.
All right, man. We'll see you later at the end of the week, next week, sometime. Bye.
Bye.